The return of the platypus to Middle Path. This is the Chinese magnolia in our front garden, which is one of the first plants to start budding in spring, and the buds swiftly grow into these glorious, intensely coloured ornaments for the front garden. It's a bit like having a self-decorating Christmas tree. And it overlooks this lovely body of water. We call it a lake, but it's really closer to a dam. It's man-made. And when we came to Middle Path, this was home to at least 3 platypus families. But we hadn't seen any platypus for probably 3 years. And the reason we suspect they'd disappeared was down here. What happened here on this floating mass of weed was that the new owners of the neighbouring property wanted to get rid of it so that they could see more water. Behind it you can see that wonderful wildlife habitat formed by the bulrushes, but in front of it there's that desolate area that's been poisoned several times. The theory being that if it was poisoned, the mass would sink to the bottom and you'd be able to see water. Unfortunately, it hasn't happened, and this is how it was done. It's a floating mass, as you can see. It's easy enough to sink through, and if you sink right through it, I'd say it would be all over, because there'd be very little there to guide you back to the surface. And you can see there's quite a generous amount of herbicide being sprayed on the plants and directly into the water. And platypus are fairly particular about the quality of their water habitat, and we believe that's what persuaded them that somewhere else was better to live. A few days ago, I saw this out in the middle of the lake. Now you're looking at it with a zoom, so you might be able to see what it is. I thought at first it was a couple of eels playing or mating on the surface. We often see that happening. Usually it's at dusk, but this was the middle of the day, so I wasn't 100% certain. But anyway, I thought I'd get closer, and it was still happening. And about this stage I thought, no, it's not eels. Maybe it's a platypus. So once an opportunity presented itself, I snuck closer to the edge of the water with the camera, and there's some ducks on the far side. But what I was very fortunate to discover out in the middle of the lake was this lovely platypus just swimming around on the surface, occasionally thrashing its head from side to side, which I think is probably the way it feeds on the sediment at the bottom of the water. But this time it was doing it on the surface. All I can think of is that there's some insect life in those bits of weed that are floating on the surface, and it's found a way to gather the food from them. But it was such a lovely thing to see these delightful creatures had returned to this body of water after such a long absence. They're so sleek and seem to swim so effortlessly, but what you can't see under there, of course, are 4 webbed feet paddling away, propelling them through the water. And they move quite quickly when they want to. Their usual approach to seeing an intruder or something they're not sure of is to just duck dive and disappear. This one swam out of sight. Later on I noticed further away on the surface, there he was again, or her, just sitting on the surface. And you see by those ripples that the front end of it, the beak, is doing something. And what we'd been used to in the old days was watching them feeding, and that's how they do it. They excavate food from the sediment on the bottom of the water but because they're air breathers, they have to return to the surface to chew it and swallow it. So they'd spend about 45 seconds on the bottom of the water, and you can see the bubbles there coming to the surface from where they've disturbed the sediment on the bottom, and then they just bob up to the surface, chew the mouthful of stuff that they've gleaned from the bottom, and then once that's done, just duck dive down to the bottom again. And they stay down there for our experience is usually 45 seconds, and it was pretty regular timing, then pop up to the top to consume the latest harvest. And they can do that for quite a while as they work their way around the lake. Gathering food. Some mouthfuls obviously take longer to deal with than others. And once they've eaten enough, they usually head back to their burrow. And occasionally they'll do it on the surface of the water and make a beeline straight for the burrow. The entrance is underwater. So what happens when they get close to the edge of the lake is they duck dive and make their way to the burrow's entrance, out of sight. And that's the last we'll see of them for a few days. Well, not a few days, for a day or two. Sometimes only a day. They'll be back again the next day feeding.